I'm so happy that you joined us today for this yet another intriguing session from MYFest. In this session, we welcome you to be who you are, to come as you are. We don't worry if from whatever race, ethnicity, gender, identity, whatever it is, but the background that you come from, we welcome you here. If you have any family, please, and they can join, that would also be very welcome, from children to parents and anyone in between. We always remember to make space for others, because not everybody is as talkative as the other, or as extroverted as the other. So we make space for each other to speak. We critique ideas, not people. And we always assume positive intentions when we are going through this. We are sharing a link of the agreements in the chat so that we can keep on adding any ideas that you might have that we might missed. There are many more things there that we welcome in this space, the agreements that we have. So you can always feel free to read through them and add anything new that you might have. So welcome to this session. And I'm handing over to Jennie. Welcome, Jennie.
Thank you very much. Heather and I are really excited to be with you all and talk to you about partnership and student-staff partnership specifically. Heather is going to lead us in the start of the session. So I guess I'll just start by saying I'm Jennie Blake. I've been interested in student-staff partnership for a long, long time, probably since I was a student. And I'm lucky enough in my current role to do a lot of work with them explicitly around collaboration and co-creation. So I come to this from that perspective, as well as someone who's just generally interested in what this kind of work together can do. And then Heather.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Wright. I am coming to this work very similarly to the way that Jennie has just described, spending a lot of time thinking about what it means to teach and learn based on being a part of different kinds of formal and informal learning environments. And in the present time, spending a lot of my energy and thinking, working with students as partners in research within the context of the center. I'm not going to say that. Spending a lot of time thinking and learning with students. I'm managing, trying to separate my work from my work right now, in the context within which I am like geographically living. So if I stumble at all in this conversation, just know that I'm doing mental calculations about what might be important to say and what might be important to leave out of this particular conversation. So I think I'd like to pass the introductions to whomever might like to speak next and just say a little bit about who you are and where you're coming from. And you can also put your introduction in the chat if you'd rather not speak at this particular moment.
I can go. Hi, Heather. Hi, everyone. I'd already introduced myself kind of at the beginning before we started recording. My name is Irene. I'm joining you from Kenya, the coast of Kenya. I love these sessions. I feel that they are usually my safe space, and I like the conversation that go on. So I'm here as a sponge to absorb and be happy. Thank you.
Okay. Shahinaz Abdurrahman. I'm from Egypt, Cairo, and I'm working as adjunct faculty at the science department at the American University in Cairo. But these days I'm visiting my brother in Vienna. Then that's it.
Nice.
I'm interested in some developing new courses in the science department.
Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Okay, thank you.
Maha says that she can't speak today. She is from Cairo and always interested in doing more student partnership. And any small amount I have done has been wonderful in outcome and process, but not sure how to expand it more in my institution. And hopefully we'll get into some of those issues and challenges later on in the conversation. So thank you, Maha. And Denise and Yasmin, feel free to put a brief introduction in the chat or just to share a little bit about who you are for everyone in the room.
Is it working? Hi. My name is Deniz. I'm from Istanbul, Turkey. I've been teaching English for academic purposes in a foundation university in Istanbul for almost more than 12 years. And on top of it, I've been teaching Italian. So I'm pretty involved with education, also teacher mentoring and similar interests I have. That's all I can say for now.
Thank you. We're glad you're here.
Hi, I'm Yasmin. I'm in Cairo, Egypt too. I'm a student at AUC, like the same institution from Dr. Mahabari. And I'm like interning at MYFest, but also I'm attending like the sessions because they're interesting and important. And sometimes they're not really related to me as a student, but sometimes they do. And it's good to be exposed to academics speaking and everything. So I hope I make the best out of this session too.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you for being here. So what we're going to do now is just kind of enter the space in an intentional way through some breathing exercises and then some prompts. And if you have a piece of paper that you would like to write on, or if you just want to kind of sit silently and think about the questions that we'll be asking, whatever feels right and comfortable for you in this moment is what we hope you'll feel free to do as you interact with us and as you're in this virtual space with us. So we're going to start by doing just a very brief box breathing exercise. And box breathing involves just taking a deep breath in for a few counts, holding that breath for a few counts, exhaling, holding the breath, and repeating. If this is not something that is comfortable for you physically or just in terms of where you are right now and what you're doing, that's fine. Welcome you just to do whatever you would like to do to kind of just be in this space with us and kind of enter this space that we're creating together. So I'm going to close my eyes as I do this, and I will guide us through just a few of these breaths, and then we'll move on to the other part of this introductory activity. So I invite you to close your eyes, get comfortable in your seat. If you are sitting, I invite you to lay down if that's more comfortable, whatever your body needs in this moment. We're going to be taking a breath in for 4 counts, holding it for 4 counts, breathing out for 4 counts, and holding it again. And we'll do this 3 times. So we'll start by breathing in, 2, 3, 4, holding, 2, 3, 4, breathing out, 2, 3, 4, breathing in, 2, 3, 4, holding, 2, 3, 4, breathing out, 2, 3, 4. One last time. Breathing in, 2, 3, 4, holding, 2, 3, 4, breathing out, 2, 3, 4. You can open your eyes. Welcome to this space, even though we're all here already, but sort of hopefully that brings you here in a different kind of way. And what we'd like to invite you to do now is to just spend maybe a minute writing or thinking about a few questions. So again, just to kind of bring us all into the space together. So if you have something to write with, or if you just want to think about these questions. So we'd like you to think about and just sort of look around and see what is in your space. Just kind of gaze around the room. You can look behind you. Just notice things around in your space. Maybe things that are on the surface that your computer is on. Just notice those things. If you have a window, what is it out your window? If the shades or the blinds are open, what do you see? What movement do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? And then moving from that, what is the energy that you want to bring into the space that we're sharing? Just kind of spend some time thinking about that for a second. If it helps, you can put your hand on over your heart. Sometimes that helps me. And then lastly, we'd like you to think about one question related to groundedness, and authenticity in our work with students as partners that you'd like to bring into the conversation today. What is a question about groundedness and authenticity in working with students as partners that you want to bring into the conversation today? Yes, Denise.
Actually, I already had a question in my mind, like because this was something I had written about in a post. But the question would be: are teachers grounded and authentic enough to foster these in the classroom or within their academic entourage? Let's put it this way. Yeah, that would be the question that I can think of. Do you want me to comment on it, or just the question itself is enough?
I think the question itself is enough. If you, I know that Jennie is helping out with the chat. Denise, if you wanted to put that in the chat, that might be helpful for me,
Sure.
because then I'll scroll back through
Mhm.
and I'll look at the questions as we have our conversation. Does everyone have a question or a thought that they'd like to bring into our discussion today? If you need a bit more time, we can We can do that. Okay, great. Thank you, Maha. All right.
As
So,
Maha types, sorry, should I go on or we wait for Maha to type?
Sure.
What do you think?
So Maha's put, my thought is on building trust so students don't have to perform what they think we want. And then Denise has added hers. And then Irene, you had a question?
Yeah, yes. How do we bring groundedness in our spaces without making students or learners or whoever we are with feel like they're joining a cult? Because most people are not very sure about some of these processes. And how often do we need to practice this as you know, as educators, so that we can be also authentic? That's my question. Thank you.
These are all really, really great questions. And just to kind of get into the conversation, Jennie, I think we could maybe spend a little bit of time as appropriate talking about the things in our backgrounds that have informed our thinking about groundedness and authenticity. But I feel really moved to consider Irene's question as maybe a beginning point, as a very natural beginning point. And I think as educators and as learners, well, I'll just own my own experience. And actually, I'm even reconsidering like being like teacherly right now in this moment. I feel that in the room, there are people who might be moved to respond to Irene's question. So I want to make the space for that before I continue. And it's okay. I can jump in. And if others have thoughts, please feel free to share either verbally or in the chat. I think this is a process, and the process begins with, at least it's begun for me with unpacking the things that have contributed to how I construct what a teaching and learning collaborative relationship looks like, either within or outside of the classroom. Before our session, Jen and I were talking, and I shared how when I was a teaching assistant almost 30 years ago, no one told me anything about how I was to interact with my students. And so through apprenticeship of observation, I did a combination of what other teachers had done when I was a student, what my professors were doing with me in my graduate courses. And gradually over time, I began to sort of question and consider, like, did that feel right to me? You know, did that allow students to bring their whole selves into the space? And also, did it allow me to be my whole self in the space? And these questions have continued to be a source of curiosity for me into the current moment, including in the most recent past, thinking about what does it mean to unperform being in a teaching and learning space, to sort of be very intentional about what it is we perform when we're performing it, to name those things, and to make choices about setting those performances aside when it most serves who we are and who we want to be in the space. But it also might be performing the things when we want to perform those things. So just kind of making choices about when we enact certain ways of being with our students, but always being transparent about what it is we're doing and talking that through with our students, so they can also make choices about how they want to be with us when we're all engaged in teaching and learning. Jennie, what do you think about that?
I was like frantically nodding. I think a lot of things. I think discussing student partnership as something that deserves like careful consideration and attention, as opposed to a mechanism. I feel a lot of times when I hear the words, well, we're going to work in partnership with students, like we're doing it because we have a thing we want to do. It's not like enough. And what that reminds me of as well is when I first started teaching, I was quite young. I was in my very early 20s. I was teaching year 7, so some of them were like 14 and yet still taller than me. And my head teacher came in once and said, I couldn't find you. Where were you? I was sitting down like at a desk with the rest of my students because that felt more natural to me. I instinctively worked like with them. That was how I wanted to be in the space with my students. It was much more focused around doing things together. I did a lot of kind of collaborative group work and things like that. But it was immediately questioned. And when you were speaking about having to kind of find your way, I didn't have a defense to that critique. And one thing I think is interesting about Irene's question about how do we need to practice this is it's not just practice it to get better, but it's also practice to understand like the why. Because I was doing it because it felt right. And it turns out, like, as I investigated and read research and continued to teach, like, there's good reason why it felt right. And it felt good to work with my students that way. But when I first started, I didn't have an explanation. So the next time my head teacher came in, I stood up and I went to the front of the class. Yeah, because the expectation about working with students in that case was me separating myself from them and like maintaining my positionality hierarchically. And so I think it's really important that, like Heather was saying, we need to decide what works in the situation, and we need to decide in collaboration with those working in partnership with us. But we need to like deliberately decide, because I think where sometimes partnership becomes problematic, especially on the part of the student who might feel forced to perform in certain ways, is when we allow those unspoken expectations to sort of dominate the decision making, right? We don't make it explicit. You don't say, I'm going to go stand up here now so everyone can see me. Like that would have been fine, right? That makes sense. I'm going to stand up here for a little while now. Maybe you guys will stand up here later. That would have made sense as an explanation, but I didn't do that. I just stood up. Hilariously, they all clocked it, and one of them was like, you stood up because the head teacher came in. I was like, I did. You're right. Because students pay attention too. So I think acknowledgement is so important, that transparency, because it allows you to work together on everything. Yeah. What is everyone else thinking? Or Heather? Denise?
Well, I'm just going to talk generally about how I feel and think about the term authenticity and later groundedness. Being authentic is one of the things that I praise the most in life. And maybe it's one of the things that the value of which also I realized or I embraced, to put better, later after my childhood, I guess, because we all go through this period after childhood that we lose contact with our real selves, and then because we have to stick to some standards that could be called also like in unity, this and that, in the workplace, at school, in different contexts of life, we might lose touch with it, actually. This is why I think it might be also a little difficult to practice this sometimes, because, and for this anyways, I'll keep it brief. The first thing we should do, maybe, this could be also an answer to, I think, Irene's question, maybe to kind of help some self-reflection, to be more aware, even though I think I know this word sounds cliche, but just kind of to reflect more objectively towards ourselves, to be aware of what's really going on, how we feel, And when we have a true understanding of this, possibly we might also be able to reflect this, transmit this into the classroom or any sphere of life, not necessarily work-wise. For groundedness instead, maybe again, the same thing might apply. We have to kind of self-check, self-regulate ourselves so that we are grounded. Because I don't think it's something that we can constantly have. Authenticity is a little bit different compared to groundedness for me, but you cannot be all the time grounded. It depends on anything and everything that could happen in seconds. And classrooms, again, is one of those settings where things are constantly changing. So maybe just, again, having a moment of realization, just reflecting upon it, which is, I think, something that we all do once the moment is gone. Because when we lose groundedness, probably we might just be in the autopilot, or we might just be emotionally loaded, let's say. But once we're off of it, I think we naturally realize it's the moment to calm down, and groundedness possibly automatically steps in. And maybe we could help the students do these. But again, I think teachers are, most of us are doing these already, because it's easier to help others than to work on ourselves. So yeah, these are the things that I could think of. Thank you.
I'm thinking about Irene's question and Maha's question, and the connections between expected or accepted ways of being within, especially within formal learning environments, and what happens when you are perceived as violating those expectations or understandings. And there are two strategies. One is more pedagogical and one is sort of more kind of orientational that come to mind for me in my practice. So the one that is pedagogical, that kind of connects to the box breathing exercise we did at the beginning, is to encourage students, sort of like you're saying, Denise, to be mindful of their embodied sense of what's happening, and to take a pause. Now, I'm not saying that I'm good at this, but I am saying that I try to practice it just as a human, and also as a person who is facilitating learning. When I notice things in the classroom, I'll just stop and say, all right, we're just going to all breathe together for a minute. No one needs to talk for a second. We're just going to take a few breaths and then pause and see how that helps us to address the issues that are being raised. Sometimes I find the best things to do in the classroom are just the best things to do, like as a human. And again, I'm not perfect in implementing those, but the attempt is I think everything a lot of times. And then the second strategy that I use, and this is just who I am as a person facilitating learning, is to constantly find ways to juxtapose what's happening and what we feel should be happening, or what folks might feel should be happening. So there's the hidden curriculum and the explicit curriculum, right? There are the schemas for what it means to be a teacher and what it means to be a student. And there's actually what's happening in the classroom. There is like performing being a teacher and performing being a student. And then there's sort of ourselves, as Jennie would say, inhabiting those performances. And so what I try to do is to playfully move back and forth between those two things, but name it as I'm doing it with the learners with whom I'm interacting. So for example, at the beginning of a class, I might say, you know, at this point in the introduction to the class, this is where I'm supposed to give you a list of all of the publications and presentations and classes that I've taught that have allowed me to be standing in front of you as an expert in this particular area of study that we're going to be focusing on in the class. For example, I could tell you I've written this book and I've co-edited this book and I've done this presentation and I just participated in MYFest with a beautiful group of people from, you know, all around the world. So I'm actually doing the thing that I just said that I'm supposed to be doing, but then I can move out of it and say, and so what do you think about me as an expert now? How, like, you know, so I try to model how to acknowledge the structures that exist while also being playful about a critique of those structures so that students can also feel enabled to do the same thing and to take risks in sort of performing and unperforming those things. And I'm going to be quiet now so other people can.
I want to invite everyone else to speak. So please just like stick your hand up or put something in the chat. I did want, before I forgot, just because Heather said something and I was like, oh, that. One thing I think is so interesting is how we can, in partnership, we can support students to like, they could navigate the system with us. You know, we help make it explicit. We show our own path. You know, we compare what might be like a real professor to like an actual professor, an authentic professor, you know, and then we allow them to unpack, you know, the difference between cultural expectation and reality. But at the same time, we can help them protest against it, you know, be inside the system, but pushing the boundaries, pushing the edges. Or sometimes I think partnership does lead to like revolution. Yeah, where you just decide it's not on. It's not on. And you're going to collectively do something different. And it can be little revolutions, you know, that then lead to bigger things. But I just thought, oh, when Heather was talking about sort of showing the way, there's so many, like with everything else, partnership allows that to take on multiple meanings and potentials because you're not sort of going, you know, along a path by yourself. It starts emerging and reconfiguring, you know, as you work with the people who are there with you, like we're doing today.
I also wanted to acknowledge what Maha had said about peers who may be doing observations and who may misunderstand the work that's being done. I think I would do something very similar as what I just described with my students, with peers who are coming in to observe my classroom, and do maybe some pre-work with them to say, what you're going to see is this. And even though I might not put as much scholarship and literature around it for my students initially, what I can do with my peers is say, here is why I'm doing these things based on this scholarship, these ways of thinking about what's important to enact in instructional relationships, such that the opportunities for learning that we most want to see materialize. And then so it's kind of doing the same thing with them, because then we can collectively examine, like the folks observing and I can examine, well, was this effective and how? But they know that there's an intentionality and an origin point for the instructional choices that I'm making. Whether or not they agree with them is another thing, but at least, you know, it then becomes something we can talk about and examine. I don't know if that really gets at like Maha's question completely, but just wanted to honor that since she had to leave the space. Irene, would you be willing to say a little bit more about what you put in the chat?
Oh no, my brain, yeah, I I was all over the place as listening to what Heather was saying and thinking about the things I can do with that conversation, that contribution that she made. Most often than not, I would say I am judged depending on what I do. I'm a very playful person. I'm sure you've come to the dance sessions. And people tend to think playfulness is not serious. They tend to think that you are not good enough. You're not a good educator if these are the things that you do. And so I was really thinking about Heather's contribution in actually having a role play at the beginning of any process that I start with, and just bring out that so that people decide what kind of a person they are working with, or they would want to work with, and decide if I fit in there, or they can give me feedback on how I can do it differently so that they are comfortable as we go on with the sessions that we might have, or the class that we might have. So that's what I was thinking about. Yeah. But that said, I tend to think that there's so much pressure put on us as educators. There's so much expectations that people don't think that we are human. I mean, at the end of the day, no matter how many degrees I may have, no matter how many courses that I may have gone to, at the end of the day, I'm human. And there are things that I believe, there are things that I bring to the table every time that I join a session, and that's important for me, that I do that because that's me. I'm trying to be me anytime that I show up, although it took a while to get here. But yeah, so that's just something that the conversations need to continue. Thank you. I see Yasmin's hand is up. Thank you.
Go ahead, Yasmin.
Yeah, I was going to say in response to what Irene said, as a student, it is true that sometimes we feel that professors are like infallible in a way, or that they know everything, or that we expect them to act in a certain way. But at the same time, when you were talking about like being playful or something, at first we always enter with the expectation that the professor is going to be very formal and like, she needs to know everything. But then when they start acting more, like you said, as human, I feel we also like tend to be more at ease, and therefore the classroom environment becomes less of a performance, like you said. And I feel that it's important to show that professors are human. I know that, of course, sometimes it's easy to, whenever something's going wrong, to say, that's because she's not professional enough or whatever. But no, like I feel it's really important to feel that they are humans. Especially my mom is also a professor, so sometimes I see how she's talking behind the scene about like the class, and she's talking just like I talk about like my colleagues. And everyone is human. So yeah, it's really important, I feel.
I want to sort of push us to move from sort of like the best manifestation of what groundedness looks like to the moments where it can be really challenging. And I'll give an example that I shared with Jennie before a session. So I am working with a group of students who I call consultants. They're co-researchers. And there's a particular student who wants to go to law school, and she's doing research for me. And she said to me, well, I'm taking from this experience the things that I think would be most relevant to me as I move toward becoming a lawyer, even though this is not really law school stuff. And there are a couple things that I felt in that moment. One was, I'm so impressed with your understanding of what is valuable and where to go deep in this learning, and what things we're just doing. And also, I felt a bit like that was an artifact still of me being the teacher, because I hope that I can do better next time in making space for conversation about what it is that students think they should be taking from the experience in order to do their next professional thing, so that both I can build it in and better understand what those things are, and find ways to connect anything that they might need to do with me with the things that they feel they need to do outside of the work that we're doing together. I guess I'm bringing that up sort of as a bridge between speaking of groundedness, and then maybe turning our conversation toward authenticity and what is authentic, which I know those two things are related, but I think there might be some important differences there as well. And I see a hand raised, so please go ahead, Shahina.
Okay. Well, usually at the end of the semester, it is a funny with me. Students, whenever I'm asking them to, they haven't done the homework or do something like this, and they are telling me, "Oh, you don't know how we are, whatever we are going through. We have midterms, we have exams, we have papers, we have so and so," as if I haven't I haven't experienced all of these before. It is funny a little bit. And this is because I let them feel that they are at ease with me. I mean, they are from the very beginning of the semester. They don't feel that I'm the professor.
I think that's so interesting. I had written in the chat, so I didn't forget it, that sometimes I wondered if partnership for those of us who are educators turns into us trying to do better for the next group of students, like inadvertently. And then our students are like, because they're generally helpful, so they're trying to help us. And as Heather's student was saying, like, well, these are the things that will help me. And Heather was like, why didn't I know? And so and then when you were talking about the students bringing up papers, like it would also be a revelation for you. I wonder if some of the explicit discussion needs to be not like I know more, but like this is my context, and partnership isn't about being the same. Because I do think sometimes we conflate partnership with similarity, but obviously like classic partnerships are opposites, and really amazing work can come out of very different contexts. But I wonder if at the heart of some of the things all of us have brought up, Maha, around the peers, and other things, is about partnership as a driver for like conformity on some level. And then this is where the authenticity and the groundedness can help us push against that, because it's like, no, it's all right. Yeah, I've done assessments before, like there's no surprise here, but actually that means that I can contribute in a slightly different way, so we can talk about it like this kind of thing. It just made me wonder. So thank you for those comments.
Denise?
Can I? Okay. So I think, yeah, we should be authentic. We should be grounded. I mean, or let's just put the shit away, whatever that is. I think it depends on a lot of things. It's not that easy also, no matter how much we want to be, or also try to foster these maybe in our environment, because in my experience, I think for me especially, it took some time to kind of re-embrace my authenticity. Like when you're at the beginning of your career, there are some very rigidly set standards, And to kind of be okay in the okay category, you have to a little bit pretend like something or someone you're not. Like this is the case mostly in like observations, professional observations, even peer observations, which are actually good, but also super unnatural. Because we all know when we are monitored, even simply when we're eating somewhere and when we know everybody's looking at us, we won't be feeling comfortable. The same thing applies to any occasion. And this is why there are a couple of things that affect reaching this true level of authenticity. And in my case, I think I re-embraced it within the years. At the moment, I'm 40 years old. And after only 30 something, I realized I was like, enough. Like, what am I doing? I wasn't all the time faking, by the way. I don't want to create a wrong impression. But I felt the pressure of, at times, doing things that did not really belong to me, just because they were doctrine-wise okay or authority-wise okay. And I think we do this in any sphere of life. We continue to do this just because it is right to do so. I'm not saying that's just break free and do not follow any rules. This is not what I'm talking about. But to have a kind of healthy and happy balance in authenticity and also groundedness, whatever you name it, we go through a couple of things. We need to go through a couple of things so that we naturally know when is the right time to say enough, or better to say, here I am. This is my way of doing it, and I'm happy with it. I'm not doing anything against the law or the regulations, whatever. I'm sticking to a kind of unity, which is perfectly have to be standard, but let me put into my real personality, which is going to make the biggest difference, because who I am authentically is going to model what I'm doing in a natural way, which is going to, again, be a model for students, not necessarily in academic terms, but in terms of like soft skills or life skills, I think. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
There's so much there. There's so much there. Thank you, Yasmin. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Denise, you're welcome. Hope to see you again. Denise, what you were just saying made me think about how normativity plays itself out as we think about authenticity. So so I'm kind of thinking about what some of the things that Jennie has been talking with me about in terms of how we or students see a role. So, you know, I have a friend who's becoming a doctor. She's like, I'm going to be a doctor. Like, as if Jennie would say, like, I'm putting on the lab coat. I'm a doctor. So there's like putting that on, and then there's inhabiting that role as you, the person. And sometimes I think if we are aligning ourselves more with normativity, the difference between inhabiting that role and putting the thing on, those differences are not as easy to discern. But as soon as we're not as normative in how we're, moving into that role, then it's where there's this this sense of like it not quite matching up. And so like, what do we do with that in order to feel authentic within how we're within what we bring to that role? Does that make sense? But that's just what I was thinking about, like based on what you were saying.
I'm wondering if Irene is looking for her mute button. Let me know. You were nodding, so I wasn't sure. I was thinking as well, when it comes to partnership, right? There's that, like Heather was saying, like you were like, I'm going to be a real doctor, I'm going to be this kind of thing. And partnership puts that kind of status quo, it can make it unstable, right? Because instead of that person living inside their own head and sort of performing to the expectations they've internalized, as a partner, you can work together to reflect and unpack and question. And I believe strongly, at least in the ways it's sort of been in my experience with the students I've worked with, in a safer space, right? So instead of us asking our students or telling them, like, we want you to reflect on what a real doctor is and question, and then go out into the world and, kind of be aggressively against any kind of conformity. If we bring that a little bit closer to home and we do that more together, I think the ask is more appropriate. I was in a session recently. Dave Cormier did something called ShrugCon on uncertainty, and I have an inability to say no. So I was in a session on that recently, and we talked about how in uncertainty is actually opportunity for change. That can be it can feel very destabilized, and it can feel a little dangerous because you're not following the expected path. And I was saying that I think it's really important inside that destabilized moment that the person with the most inherent power in the situation be the most vulnerable, so that we don't ask our students who are partners with us to be the ones necessarily like at the forefront of something, right? Unless they decide to take on that role. And we don't hide behind them signing off on something. Yeah. Like, oh, we've consulted with students. This is what they've said. It's their idea, that it's a real partnership where there's like an acknowledgement of the power structures, like we talked about in the beginning. And I think that links to that feeling, where you're almost isolating yourself, by putting on a set of expectations. And I feel quite strongly that partnership can help push against that and maybe mitigate that to an extent. You can't get rid of it because we all live in the world and things like that. But yeah, it really made me think a little bit differently about how we approach the work we do, at least with my students.
I have a question for us to consider, and that is, how do we define authenticity, and how do our students define authenticity? So I've done some work in the last several years around experiential learning. And within that area of pedagogy, it's common to hear folks say things like real world experiences. Real is sort of like maybe a proxy for authenticity, maybe not, but it really makes me question, what does it mean to students for something to be authentic when it comes to their emerging professional identities? And how does that shape the pedagogical choices that we might make? So in the past, maybe even currently, I define authenticity in experiential learning as students being involved in some kind of activity or work that has import outside of the collaborative relationship that I have with them in the teaching and learning space. So, engaging in a process that has import for another group of people or another person, independent of the teaching and learning that we're doing together, or perhaps they are focusing on a product and that product is shared with a stakeholder within or outside of the university who has the power based on that student's work to do something based on what the student presents to them. I think sometimes even an imaginary audience is enough for a thing to feel authentic for us as humans or for students. So if I'm creating a blog or creating a social media account or a website, it may be that only my mother goes to the website, which to me may not make it authentic. because, you know, she has to say that she likes it, right? But if I imagine other people outside of my mom going to the website, even if they don't go, that sometimes is enough for it to feel like the work that I'm doing has a quality or it is authentic in some way. And so I'm curious how y'all define authenticity in the work that you do with students as partners. And I don't feel like there's one answer. I'm just curious. Go ahead, Denise.
Isn't there anyone else who would like to say something? Because this is the third time I would be stepping in, so I can wait.
I'll come after you. I'll come after you. Just go.
Like I just thought of the possible student perception of authenticity, and I just reflected on my student experience. And I just can imagine authenticity as something that the teacher brings in as like part of himself or herself, thus meaning maybe even like a simple storytelling that the person invented based on his or her real life. That's bringing a piece of yourself to the class, like your authentic self to the classroom. Maybe being more approachable, because from my understanding, again, as a student, if I find a teacher not approachable, that means to me, the teacher has some kind of barriers that are hard to surpass, which might be, again, like, I don't know why, but I think that the person might have something unreal, not very natural. Yeah, I'm done.
For me, authenticity is feedback in whichever form or format or in any way. It shows me that someone listened, even if they didn't like it. Someone read, even if they just were making me happy. Someone heard about me, even when the expectations were not that high or whatever it is that people think about. I think there's a bit of that comes. There's a bit of authenticity. That word that comes with the feedback that we get from our learners, from our participants, from our peers, and I guess it goes back to how do we practice, because then when you get the feedback, you decide what is it that is meaningful, what is it that I can move around so that I can resonate, or people can resonate more with me, that people can feel that I'm one of them, that when I show up, I'm genuine. When I'm there, then I have something to say. So for me, feedback in whatever form is really key to being authentic.
I hear a lot about authentic assessment and authentic curriculum, and what I think is so interesting is I do think, from having spoken with students, authenticity has a lot to do with relevance. You know, sort of relevant to self, relevant to goals, relevant to, like Irene was saying, like just relevant to showing me you care. It has to, I think authenticity is almost the thing that makes it matter. You know, like, how do I know this assessment matters? Oh, well, I need to learn this because I'm going to be a doctor. Or how do I know my feedback's authentic? I can tell they read my paper. You know, there's something that the work that we do to ensure we stay connected and that our pedagogy and practice is relational, I think that helps build and support this drive towards authenticity. And then I also think that sometimes what happens for students, but also staff, especially those of us starting out in our careers, is the mismatch between our experience and the cultural demands that I think a lot of times we call imposter syndrome, really, and Heather's heard this. That's actually about authenticity. You know, I feel an imposter because I feel I don't belong, but that's because I cannot be authentically in the space. The space is not actually there for me. So instead of it being a problem with me, you know, oh, I should get over it. I definitely belong, you know, like some kind of self-talk issue. It's a recognition that although there has been a demonstration or like an invitation to the space, when you're embodying that career, that moment, that effort, that activity, something inside of you is like, no, no, I'm not really meant to be here. And it could be an issue around your perspective, but I think it's equally like possible that you're recognizing some kind of systemic or institutional barrier to you being able to really engage. And so I think for our students, although a lot of it is linked to that, is it, you know, is it relational? Can I see that it matters? Some of it, for some of them, is probably like, yeah, I thought I'd be welcome here, but I'm not, you know, I don't feel like authentically included. So I just, that's why I think partnership is so helpful. It opens up those dialogues. And then when you really embrace partnership as a way to practice learning, it allows you, those of us who are educators, to like seed some of the intentionality of the work so that students can ensure, you can all ensure there's space for people to be there. Yeah. A really convoluted definition. I was getting there in the end.
I keep thinking about questions that we can ask ourselves or that students might ask themselves that get at authenticity. And the questions that keep coming up for me as y'all have been talking are questions like, do I matter? Does this matter? And is this meaningful? Or how is this meaningful? And the first two questions to me have a lot to do with the level of agency that is present in a partnership. So when we in assessment, I often encounter instructors who are thinking through rigor in their coursework and have assigned, for example, another paper to up the ante, to, you know, increase the rigor in their course, in how they're defining it. And a question that is a very legitimate question that I often ask is, do you like grading these papers? Often the answer is no. And then I might ask, do your students like writing these papers? And often the answer is no. And so I'm thinking to myself, if you don't like grading them and your students don't like writing them, then maybe there's another way to do this that engages both of y'all's agency, right? In deciding what is meaningful, like what does matter. And you can still be assessing student learning and knowledge and skill and attitudes. But hopefully we can find a way that you can do that in ways that connect with agency, with joy. And if those things are present, then the questions of, do I matter? Does this matter? Is this meaningful? Which are just as legitimate as questions for us as people who are facilitating learning, right? Then, you know, if those are more present, if joy and agency are more present, then I think that's a good barometer for mattering and meaningfulness somehow. I'm thinking through this as we're talking, so please feel free to disagree. Right. And what does it mean, like, you know, linguistically, what does it mean for something to be meaningful, right? I feel like that's a really generative space to be in. Yeah. Denise?
When we talk about meaningfulness or purposefulness, I often remember students asking sometimes, why do we do this activity? I can just think of this one. So practically, they're asking the rationale behind doing it. And I think this is a fair question, which might not be always easy to answer, because we do have an answer, but that might not be satisfactory for them, as their expectations are different. But I think it's also expected that the purposefulness and meaningfulness is required in this too, because we are driven like that. We look for purpose, we look for meaning in anything we do. So also in this one, yeah, we should, when we know why we're doing something, when we know why, it just even easily, magically becomes feasible, whatever that is, or easy to understand, let's say. And this is how I would define meaningfulness, although I'm not sure if I've given an appropriate answer.
This has been so helpful to me personally. It's opening up new doors for thinking about authenticity, because in addition to joy and agency, what I'm also realizing, Jason, what you just said is there's also a place for uncertainty. So joy, agency, and uncertainty all together, I think, are tied up in my definition of authenticity. And that's why when we have students present to a stakeholder, there's an authentic piece of it. So there's joy in representing knowledge. There's agency in demonstrating that knowledge or using that knowledge in a particular space. And there's also uncertainty, because you don't know how this stakeholder is going to receive the knowledge that you are conveying to them. So like that uncertainty piece, even though I've considered it in different contexts, it's new for me to be putting this together in the definition of authenticity. But I guess it is a part of experiential learning. Like when we come back to the theory of experiential learning, like that uncertainty and, you know, the idea of a productive failure, which kind of connects to uncertainty, is a part of that as well. I'll have to go in just a couple of minutes because I have another meeting that I could not reschedule, and Jennie has generously agreed to do a wrap up. But I do hope that y'all can join us next week if time and interest allows, because this has been an amazing conversation for me personally, full of joy, agency, and uncertainty.
And Denise, before you have to dash off, I just want to say thank you as well for your contributions and for your thoughtfulness in the conversations that we've had. It's been absolutely brilliant. And I know Heather has to go, and we'll just do a little bit of wrap up. It will be more like tidying to get ready for the next one. I just want to say thank you to everyone, especially to Heather for working on this with me, and that we're looking forward for next week and the next session.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have one question. Are y'all on the MYFest Slack space?
Yeah.
I wonder,
Yes.
this may not work. You know, our intentions might be good and this may not work, but if anyone is interested in continuing to engage in conversation about these issues, I would love to continue kind of thinking together asynchronously, especially in preparation for our last session, which is next Thursday. So I'm feeling very inspired.
I don't know what you meant. I said yes,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure. I just
I'll-
received the email for
Yes,
participation.
yeah. I'll ask that the Slack be highlighted in the next email that comes out, Denise, so that you can see where you have to. It's as easy as clicking a link.
Oh. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Okay,
Have a nice day.
I'm gonna take
Yeah.
my leave.
Yes. Yeah. Very
Bye.
good. Thank you. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shana.
Bye, Irene. Bye,
Thank you
everyone.
very
Bye.
much.
Thank you, Heather. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Pause the record.